Hi, Sarima.
Hey,
Welcome.
Cora.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the another episode of Philosophers in the Therapy Room. I think today gonna be the 12th session that we have. Actually, we've been to your uh, spaces, and actually we could share our thoughts and our concerns with you, and we are looking forward to receive your comments, your any kind of review or reflections on whatever we've discussed. Definitely it's gonna shape and challenge, or even gonna confirm whatever we are discussing here.
Yeah.
Give us ideas, what kind of concern, what gonna be your concerns, so we can think about it. We can actually analyze it together, and we might have sessions dedicated to your concerns, if you are happy to share it with us. Okay, today, Sarima, we're gonna actually embark on a continuous journey of trauma and trauma studies from a philosophical and especially phenomenological perspective. I guess we believe that we haven't covered enough in the I guess in the concept around the concept of trauma, and we decided to have another episode of dealing with these concepts, but it's gonna be a little bit different. And she and Sim are gonna share with you that how different this session would be from the last and previous sessions we had.
Yeah, thanks for putting me on the spot. Okay, so last time we were discussing trauma, and one of the most important features that we identified was that any normal or regular human experience has this structure of temporality where we have a past and a future, and present is a bridge between the past and the future, and there's a very particular kind of orientation that we have towards our past and towards future. And this orientation is sort of disrupted in trauma because your past is always leaking into the present and leaves no possibility for the future, which we discussed in detail. And we wanted to go back to the same concept of temporality, but with a little bit of twist. And that's where, the kind of trauma we are going to discuss today will look very different from the normal regular trauma that we notice with PTSD or complex PTSD. And this is the trauma that you might have heard a lot about these days as intergenerational trauma or transgenerational trauma. And as the terminology suggests, that it's a trauma that you inherit, that is handed over from one generation to another, which can be something that belongs to a family because it's a familial trauma, or it can be a national or a communal thing, because it could be the result of an oppressive event or something belonging to the history of that nation or that community. And all of these things do kind of carry on in the next generation. But when we think of this language of past, present, and future, we want to remind, and we did mention that a lot in our last last recording, that the past is not just your personal past, not the day I was born and since then whatever I've been building. My past is also the past of my parents, the past of my friends, my husband, so that all impacts me now because that is actually leaking into my present. It's not just my family, it's the past of my people, whether it be, my religious identity, whether it be my national identity, whether it be people who immigrated to Australia. So that past, I have inherited it with them, and I'm part of that past, or the entire humanity. In fact, I also think about the past of our gender, what we inherit from as other women, or as men, or people with different sexual or gender identities, what you inherit. And the trauma that lies in that past, the past of a generation before you. It could be just the previous generation, your parents' generation, or it could be a generation 1,000 years ago. How do we understand that trauma? How does that trauma work? How does that impact my present? What's the structure of that trauma? And what's the way through it? And so that's something that we are going to reflect on today. And it's going to have something very similar to the trauma that I have experienced in my childhood. However, its presentation is enormously, gigantously different from the personal trauma. And the way to healing might be similar, but again, there are too many variables there, too many other things to consider, that I think it's best to treat them very differently and work on them very differently.
Salima, you mentioned that there should be, in all of our past, there are certain tragic events through even it's our family past or a generational past or an ethnic past. So if it belongs to my past generation, family, grandfather, grandfathers, and it doesn't have the symptoms such as CPTSD or PTSD, then how would we know that it actually existed? It belongs to the history, it's an open book. You just go and read about it and you know what happened in the world. There are, World War One, two, it happened. Everyone knows about it. The white British came and colonized Australia. Native people killed. In Canada, in America, South America, African people, the colonization, all of these things happened, and we know all about it.
Exactly, it's not hidden. It's not.
It is not hidden.
Unknown.
Exactly. So, but because we don't have that symptoms, how you would know that it is still existed? I wouldn't call a symptom because it's not as clear as a direct trauma. Then how do you want to say that, something that has existed and happened to my generation, to my ethnicity, to my people, it affected them and it's going to affect me and it's affected me and it's going to affect all of my forthcoming generation. How you would know that such a thing ever existed? Because there's no symptoms.
I think I would disagree here because I would call it a symptom, and I was thinking more of Irigaray. So Irigaray is a French feminist philosopher. She was initially a psychoanalyst. She's also a linguist. So I think she's still alive.
Yes, she is.
I believe so. Laura would be angry with me if I wouldn't know that. So our friend, who is an amazing philosopher, she has expertise on Irigaray. So Irigaray, she's a feminist philosopher, and she goes to the whole idea of philosophy, and especially feminist philosophy, by approaching it through psychoanalysis. So that was one of the things that was very particular about her. So she talks about the mother-daughter bond. And because this is something, if you know anything about psychoanalysis, it's all about the mother-child relationship. That's where it begins, and then it moves on to father-child relationship, and everything that you understand about your present is kind of rooted in your childhood, in your relationship with your parents. Sometimes it's the butt of the joke that everything is about your mother or your father. So people do joke about that a lot. So Irigaray talks about how the mother-daughter relationship actually is not. It's kind of lost in. She's talking particularly about Western civilizations, and she talks about that. Not only in the psychoanalytic literatures, but even in general forms, in the form of the mythic, the stories that we tell, it is kind of missing. We miss the symbolic, the language, to understand mother-daughter relationship without putting it to the language of the sexualization of women seen as sexual object in our society. And she says that, we see the symptoms of that loss in the relationship between the mother and the daughter, the way the daughter is pulling away from the mother. The term she uses is dereliction. that the daughter feels abandoned, she runs away from the mother. So we see all those symptoms. We see that they are suffering, but we don't know and understand the structures that bring it about. We are not aware of those structures. So
what are the identity structures that actually led
shaped
into
it? Exactly. So what we see with intergenerational trauma is these symptoms, these kind of behaviors, mannerism, emotions, and many other ways of responding to the world, orienting towards the world, positioning yourself with relation to other people. And we will bring a lot of examples here just to highlight how certain historical events shape certain mannerisms which are still embodied after multiple centuries, decades. It depends on what event we're talking about. And so we notice those symptoms, but we have no awareness of where they're coming from. And that's where it becomes very different from, I don't want to call it regular trauma, but personal trauma.
Yeah, it's a personal trauma.
Yeah, personal trauma, because if people remember, we did talk about that in case of personal trauma as well, as long as you are still traumatized by it, you don't have access to the experience of trauma as such, as a reflective experience. You don't have language for it. What you have language for is basically the event. This happened, that happened. You still don't have access to the experience as a kind of reflective, as a kind of a rational event. With the intergenerational trauma, you have no access to that event because it didn't happen to you. You just inherited its impact. You just inherited the mannerism.
Exactly. I guess I still think that there is no symptom, but actually the symptom, because symptoms in psychology, we call symptoms as something that's a disruption to our everyday performance, everyday activity. It is something that is, it's abnormalities. We call symptoms as abnormalities. That's why I think still that we don't have symptoms of intergenerational trauma, and I guess that's the problem with intergenerational trauma. In personal trauma, you have symptoms. You have hypervigilance. You have constant anxiety. You have sometimes depressive moods that you don't know what is the cause of that, what are the roots of that. So there are symptoms which is destructive of our everyday performances.
Okay, I understand where you're coming from. So you are treating symptoms as like symptoms of illness.
Exactly. And as abnormality.
Exactly. And what I meant by symptom was it has an expression.
Exactly.
It has an affect.
Exactly.
It is an affective. It shows in your life, but it is your normal.
Exactly. That is exactly the point that makes it even harder, because we call it normal nowadays.
Exactly.
So it was a symptom for the generation that faced that traumatic event. It was a collective of symptoms after the invasion of Mongols to northern Iran and Persia at that moment. 1,000 years ago. So it was a collection of symptoms at that time. When you just look at the literature, and especially literature and poetry of that time, it's a totally manifestation of a deep depression, a deep level of melancholy. It's a hopelessness, and it's a complete hopelessness. It's a loss of total future horizon for a whole generation. So it was there, but it was a symptom for that Iranian people who actually faced the Mongol invasion. But it stayed with us. Those collection of symptoms stayed through generation and became a normal for that ethnicity, for I will say for Persian people. And now when we are looking at it, we call it normal. Say, okay, why we are doing this? We don't know why this things that we do, this behavioral pattern that we have in our everyday interaction with the world and with the other people around us, where it's rooted, but sometimes it feels that it is not optimal. It doesn't have any point. It seems total meaningless. Why we feel it that way? Because now we feel that it's not
it doesn't make sense.
Exactly, there is no correlation between the things that we do and within our behavioral patterns with whatever we experience in our everyday life in a modern world. You know, the correlation, the significance of our behavior toward anything that we experience in our everyday life in a modern world, it's kind of a dissonance. You know, there is no correlation, there is no meaning, kind of interaction between these things that we do. And when we feel it this way, we need to just give it a pause and say why I feel that way. Because this might be the defense mechanism of the generation that actually affected by that specific traumatic event. Somehow a way of they dealing with the trauma, just dealing, not healing.
Exactly.
But dealing with the trauma, and because the generation after, they didn't know the very specific reasons for doing the same stuff that they do, the same practices. They inherited the symbolic. They inherited the language. They inherited the symbolic activities. Without knowing that these symbolic activities are symbolizes what? What is it that many of our cultural symbolic activities actually they're like that? That somehow they were a response to a specific idea, a specific event, even a traumatic event. And then we lost the correlation between the event and the behavior. But actually the response, the behavior stayed as a symbol, as a symbolic behavior, as an answer or as a perspective toward engaging with the world, a kind of a way of being in the world, because our behaviors, actually it's our way of being in the world. It's, I mean, our behaviors are exactly shaping the way that we belong to the world and we behave in the world and we are in the world. So we know that we have certain way of being in the world without knowing how it's shaped. And part of that is the traumatic event of our generation that shaped it.
And like it's important to remember that we're not saying that our previous generations just hand over the trauma. No. Your mannerism, your behavior, your way of approaching other people, it's all shaped by the previous generation. You get a lot of you create a lot of new things, you invent, you also do a lot of things on your own, but the bulk of your tools, how to manage your emotions, how to be around other people in your family, you kind of learn and inherit a lot of those things from the previous generation, and they just carry on. And some of them might be problematic, but they generally work. So everything might not be optimal, but it still is working, and it's not very disruptive in your everyday experience. But when we are talking about intergenerational trauma, it does carry the pain of the wound. It does carry that, if we want to put it in the IFS language, the trauma always carries a part that you want to exile. Because it's too painful to visit. It is too difficult. So if, for example, if a child experienced abuse in their young age, it is so hard to visit that time that they were experiencing that abuse, whether it be physical, sexual or verbal. that what they do is they abuse that the self exiles that part. And by exile we mean no one visits it, it's sitting in the corner, and the rest of the self is basically just there protecting the self from reaching to the exile. So everything else is just a measure so that we can never. So even when we think about addiction, it's a way to avoid getting to the exile, or being a workaholic. So you thrust yourself into work or people pleasing or whatever it is.
Actually, people pleasing is a very, very good example. That actually it stays in the whole generation. It becomes your national symbol.
Exactly, because you don't want to touch the exile.
Exactly.
And with the intergenerational trauma, the thing is that the exile is coming to you and you're protecting it, but you don't know the exile.
You're protecting your generational identity against something that you don't have any idea what is that. You know,
you have
because
no idea.
you inherited kind of that protective behavior.
Exactly.
And it's very, very fascinating. So we inherit the symbolic, which is the protective activities toward the self, that. And I really want to put the Jungian concepts here, which is a collective consciousness.
Yes.
That self that we're talking about, because it's not a self of a person.
Yeah.
It's a collective identity.
Exactly.
It's the identity of a collective. So we're talking about a collective self, a self of a nation,
exactly.
a self of an ethnicity.
That's an extremely important point to remember.
Exactly.
That you play a big part in the creation of yourself, but you co-create it. You cannot just pick up that this is myself. You inherit, you take part in it, and part of it is your national identity, ethnic identity, your gender identity. All of these things play, and you negotiate.
Yeah.
But you're always in conversation, and everything else has an impact. So it is really important, going back to the Jungian idea, that collective consciousness.
So it's all about this consciousness that I have. It's just partly it's a response to the now, here and now. It's a response to whatever comes to me. But actually, it's a huge part of that consciousness is a consciousness in dialogue, in a constant dialogue with my past. And not only my past, but with the collective consciousness of the past.
Yeah.
So I belong to the history of the world, and my people, and my ethnic identity, and my actually gender identity. So it's all about this constant dynamic dialogue which is happening. But the very important thing is that collective consciousness that we're talking about is that self has this collective self has exile part due to the generational trauma that it faced, or a specific event that is a tragic event that happened to them. But these protective factors, these protective behaviors came through the generations. It becomes part of a continuous narrative of the collective self, without me knowing that in a constant repeating that narrative, that collective narrative, I am still persisting, taking care of a self which had an exile, which has a hand on putting the exile in the basement, protecting that national identity, that collective identity, to face the exile. So I become partly a protective of not only my exiled selves, but actually I am also protecting myself and my past generation and generation to come, to the exiled self of my generation. So, and that becomes even complicated, more complicated than personal trauma.
Exactly, because the exile has no face. The exile has, in a way, nothing that you can link to your personal history as such. You can remember the mannerisms, the behaviors that were given to you, but where they're coming from, why is it, as you mentioned that with the personal trauma, the hypervigilance, all these symbols, you are aware that it is because that event. And so you can always connect the mannerism, the behavior to an event. With the intergenerational trauma, you just inherit the mannerisms, the behavior. The exile is a baggage.
Yeah.
Something you're protecting, but you have no awareness that you're protecting it. All this is happening because below the surface there's an exile.
Yeah.
That has kind of lost its meaning now.
Yeah.
Like you were mentioning the Persian mannerism.
Yeah.
Can you give the exact example that you mentioned earlier?
It's really interesting. It was it's a very prominent sociologist that I was listening to, and he was giving a lecture in Farsi, and he was talking about how Mongol invasion shaped the very the very behavior that we call it as a this Persianness, like we are very we are very generous toward people. We are all the time talking good about people in when we are facing them. We try to even if we forbid any criticism in the face of the people, we try to accommodate whatever they do to us because they are guests. So we are very bad somehow in providing boundary.
Yeah.
I mean, boundary setting toward the moment that you are a guest, the boundaries totally is gone. A guest can do whatever because they are guests.
Yeah.
Because say, okay, they are guests and they're gonna leave anyhow. And those are parts of the very behavior that during actually centuries of Mongol empires in actually the kings in Persia, because after the Mongol invasion, for centuries we had Mongol kings. So there were dynasties. There were dynasties that were all Mongols. So these kind of behaviors that we need to feel, we need to make them feel at home, otherwise they're gonna ruin you. The things, the extreme brutality that happened through Mongol invasion, there were no living being when they were invading a city. Living being, cats and dogs, it is written throughout history that when they would invade a place, there were no cats and dogs even alive.
That level of brutality.
So that level of brutality. So your defense mechanism is that, okay, they're here, we're gonna just be generous with you, we're gonna share whatever we have so you can spare us. Then it becomes this kind of behavior, it becomes your national identity. That's
who you are.
This is how we actually we are treating our guests.
Yeah.
Not having a boundary.
Yeah. And actually that, like the whole idea, just if we go back to those generations that experienced that brutality and they shifted their whole behavior and the way they engage with it. And it's interesting to remember that, you cannot pretend forever. That's really important for human behavior. There was this an excellent example. Someone was kind of placing it before they started an article where this woman was abducted by a group which was kind of sort of revolutionary but very violent, and they were doing a lot of it was somewhere in America or Ireland, I don't remember exactly, but it was a historical event. And so and for some reason they kept her alive and she was staying with them, and they were planning activities, this and that. So just to survive, she started pretending to empathize with their cause. And by the time that she was rescued, she had become a full empathizer. Because in order to survive, she started pretending to be them. And then our brains don't know like how long you're pretending. Depending upon the period of that acting, it can switch between these two positions. But if you're pretending all the time, you become that person.
Yeah.
And so when we are talking about that first generation that was trying to do that,
it was a matter of survival.
Exactly. So it wasn't about, I will pretend to be a pleasant person from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and after 5 p.m. I will be myself. You're not like that. You finally switch behaviors. That's why, when what we normal people try to do is that if you go into positions where you have to pretend a lot, you try to decrease that window. Like if I have to be polite to people who are very impolite, I want it to be in a shorter window. So that's what we normal people try to do. But if you keep pretending day in, day out, all the time, you become that person. So that is something really important because your brain changes. Our brain are plastic. We now know that even brain of an old person has the possibility of changing the neural network. So it is something that our brain does. So when you are pretending a lot in response to trauma,
because you are establishing a new position. You are establishing a new relationship towards something which, from outside it's called a very destructive. This is a harmful event or thing or a relationship, but it's a matter of survival.
Exactly.
So you need to make a relationship in order to you survive that connection, that encounter at all.
It was result of a trauma, the need to survive in that world, the impossibility of standing up for yourself, and with that maybe a lot of shame because as a nation, who are we? Pleasing these oppressors. So a lot of that shame and guilt that came with that behavior, and now when it has been we were discussing earlier because I'm an Indian by origin and I have a lot of family that lives in Iran, and that's the one thing they always say, that they are so nice to you on the face that you can never know what they actually feel
about you.
And so some people try doing business with Iranian people, and they find it so hard because it's impossible to read them. Because they will be, yes, you're my friend, you're this, you're that. You have no idea whether they will call you back or not once that meeting is over. So they find it so hard. Like Indians are also not very clear. But we don't have that much people pleasing. So we will try to please you only if we want to get something out of you. We won't try to please you out of no reason. So it's not our baseline. Our baseline is maybe a little bit rude. Maybe can be a bit rude. When we are trying to please you, it's basically that I want something out of you. So that's why we find it very hard to read
and
Persian.
And it's really interesting because now I'm thinking about why. Especially we are nicer to the people that we know that they are more powerful than us, like white people. Like Western people,
and that's without knowing you.
Exactly.
It's
so
just
we know that it's just
this person I need to please.
Exactly.
This is inferior. I can't treat him whatever way I like.
Exactly.
This is superior
because I need to treat him well.
Yeah, I'm afraid of him.
Because I am afraid of him. Because I don't know what they can do to me.
Just imagine.
So it's just how it's now. I'm reflecting on that, but as a young generation, I'm not young anymore, but still. As a young generation, we always question that why we are doing like that. Why we are not doing the same, openness, some same generosity to a inferior race or inferior color or whatever they call it, inferior people that we call inferior, and we are just doing to the white people. It's not about that. It's about because there is something in it that we are all the time missing it, and that's the history.
Yeah. Even this inferior part, because I remember my family living in Iran and people who are from Pakistan, because they could read the feelings. So they always told that Persian people don't like Indians because especially because a lot of Indians who go and live in Iran are going there to study in a religious seminary, and Indians, they send their least useful child to religious seminary because this one can't make money through learning engineering, science, or this. So this is purely Indian mentality. So you have to be a doctor, engineer, or something like that. If you can't do any of that, you can go into arts or religious
studies.
And that's more like, I'm talking more my generation. I'm not sure what's happening now. So the people who are coming to Iran are not the elite Indians. They are really the dumb Indians, not so well educated. Sometimes they're coming from a very small town. Their wives are also not educated. So the whole idea is that this is a very inferior race.
Yeah.
And
you don't have any power on us.
Because my family, they told me that under their chador they would prefer not wearing Indian clothes because they didn't want Iranians to think you're Indian. So that's my family telling me that they would wear clothes that wouldn't show that you're Indian. So like shalwar, because if something opens and they see Indian clothes,
they must.
And my, like for example, my cousin, she is very light skinned, so she was happy that no one thought she's Indian, because then she wouldn't get the respect from her friends in school, because if you are Indian, you are an inferior race. And that's something I'm talking about people living in Iran, Indian people living in Iran. Say a bit goes to same to Pakistanis, but my aunt was telling me that it was like Indians, then Pakistanis, then Iranian. So like Pakistanis were superior to some extent than Indians for whatever reasons.
Again, Iran. It has a very historical thing,
exactly. And also the way they presented them, Pakistanis are a little bit well dressed than Indians at times. So those things might have played a role. But anyway, so it's coming back to, it's not something that I have thought about before.
It just dawned on us. It doesn't come to us the reason to say, okay, why? Why should I be like that? So I question myself that what kind of this behavior, it is not reasonable, it is not ethical.
And I'm not that person.
I'm not that person. If I want to be generous, I'm going to be generous to everyone. If I'm not to anyone. So I cannot do a cherry picking and who I should be generous to or not.
Exactly.
Because
it's my primary position.
Yeah, because if you're generous, this is your being.
Exactly.
This is your way of being. You're a generous person. So then how it becomes a cherry picking for certain nationalities or, in certain regards to certain ethnicities. And that's the reason. There are some reasons behind it which we don't know.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
These reasons actually are very hidden to us. We just got the behavior, we just got the very manifestation of a certain behavioral patterns without knowing that why those or where these behavioral patterns are coming from. What are the answers? Because there are answers to certain situations, but we don't know what such a situation would look like.
The exile is not here. I mean, exile is here. I'm carrying its weight on my back, but I have no awareness, no access to that exile, which makes it so difficult because the mannerism, the behavior, the different approaches and orientation towards other people, I carry all of that, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
And I have no access to it.
So Saima, looking at it through these traumatic events and intergenerational trauma, because the moment we're talking about trauma healing comes to fore, and then say, okay, I know that I have certain symptoms, which is a disruptive of my everyday interaction with the world.
Yeah,
it disrupts my way of being in the world. I cannot get the optimal perception. I cannot get the optimal point of me engaging with the world because of hypervigilance, because of
people pleasing,
boundary issues, the problem with saying no or sacrificing or
even if you do something for yourself, you feel guilty.
Yes, exactly.
Something is wrong. Why am I so happy?
Yes, true. Look, these are the things that we don't know exactly why we're feeling that way, but affect actually stayed in us.
Yeah.
Affect is the sedimentation in very way of being. The affect is still there, and that's why the cognitive resolution it's not possible. Because if it was possible, me reading history of Mongol invasion in Iran, probably it would sort it out. My generational and intergenerational people pleasing. But it didn't.
It did.
It's 1,000 years that we are practicing this, and actually, it's a very interesting label, the good label on us that there are very Iranians are hospitable people to aliens, to stranger, but it's nobody thinks about how it affects the Persian family that doing this
and living this like, because you are nice to them, but you don't feel good towards them. It is this dissonance.
Exactly.
It's not optimal.
There.
It's not an optimal way of engaging with other people, because you are putting extra effort in kind of being polite and generous.
Because somehow you feel there's a threat underneath of this encounter.
Exactly.
Because and then it's really interesting, because the threat now, it's not physical threat, so it's not about a matter of life and death. It's a matter of respect. We call it aberu. So it's my face. I'm keeping my face in this. So even keeping face, it was actually a matter of life and death. But nowadays, it's not about it's not a matter of life and death. It's I'm keeping my face. A face in regard to any external threat. But I act in a way that there is an external threat.
And this is something that we have, like, they have developed a language and explanation for, but it's still not fitting. It doesn't,
still not fitting.
It doesn't make sense, and that's where that you just mentioned the idea of healing, because being a Persian person now, all of this. Yeah. Does it change anything?
No, it doesn't change. It is and even if I want to change it, I need to explain to my mom, to my mother-in-law, that why I'm not doing certain things, why I create a very strict boundary about the relationship between my guest and myself in my house.
And even if you do it, for example, you say, I want to drop all this Persianness, I'm not under attack from Mongols anymore. I will not be polite to strangers. I will not be polite to white people unless they are my bosses.
Yes.
Or something like that. But, I will not be polite to anyone unless I need to. And you just become this hideous person, for example.
But actually, this is a reaction again.
Yeah, and you would be uncomfortable. You wouldn't be able to sleep. All these interactions will play in your head. And that's all the sign that you're still not comfortable with it.
No, the anger makes you sick. The anger makes you totally ill.
Exactly. So this is not healing. Healing is not. Knowing doesn't lead to healing, as we discussed with the Spinoza episode. Affect can only be replaced by another affect.
But then the problem is, I don't have access to the affect.
Exactly.
The preliminary affect.
I didn't go through that.
I haven't go through that. Then then why is it at all important for me to think about healing?
Exactly.
I before I go to phenomenological actually approach to intergenerational phenomenon, Selma, do you want to talk about this exile, the generational exile, and then why do you think that even thinking about healing of a generative or generational trauma can be effective?
Okay. So if we think of like the IFS language around, personal trauma and the language of exile. So the way IFS approaches it is that, first of all, when they talk to a client, they want to understand, as a therapist, we want to get access and with permission, and they have a very particular way of accessing it. But theoretically, the whole idea is that you want to understand and build a map. And as we have mentioned previously, that IFS talks about parts of you. You have multiple parts, and these you can also talk about it multiple thoughts, ideas, personalities within you, and there's nothing wrong with it. So, for example, when we think of normal things like, part of me wants to eat a lot of sugary food, parts of me also wants to be healthy. And there's nothing wrong. I don't have a split personality. I have both of these things there. So when IFS talks about, even unhealthy patterns, it says that these parts are doing something there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's dig a little bit deeper and build a map what each part is doing before calling it that, self-harming part is bad, binge eating part is bad, people pleasing part is bad. Let's not do any of that. Just go to each and every part and see what function they are playing. And once you try to, especially people who have a traumatized past, you would notice that all of them are trying to protect something, something that has to be hidden. And with a lot of, and nothing can change until we reach that hidden part. Some things, like once you are talking to the protectives, all these parts that are trying to hide something else, you can start seeing some changes. The person can become a little relaxed, can have a little clarity, and they can start moving towards healing. But unless you get access to the exiled part, to the part that has been left there crying or hurt or ashamed. Shame is one of the biggest part of that exile. Someone whose parents just belittled them as a child, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, you're pathetic, you're useless, you're unlovable. It could be through language or it could be through behavior. You didn't say anything, but never showing any love to that child. So I'm unlovable is that exile that's hidden underneath, and that's why I'm trying to please everyone. So until we get to that part, until we embrace it, until we show that part that no, you are not unlovable, it's okay to say that you were hurt, you cannot move past that. So that's where we want access. And with the intergenerational trauma, it's very hard to have direct access to that exile. So, we will discuss, that how can we access that part. But I think another thing that we need to discuss is that do we need to access? Do we need healing? That's a question we can ask. For example, if we learn about, for example, with the Persian character, now you know that it doesn't, you're not under threat anymore, you're not oppressed anymore. Certain things have become part of the fabric of your society. If you all of a sudden start being impolite, you would start hurting many people. So maybe you can still take part in this practice to some extent. Why should I keep thinking about changing it? With some practices we can say, yeah, it's okay, it can work. But with other ones, we still have, like, especially if they are, a kind of carrying over of an oppressive structure, the question is that can we leave it there? Can we just say that, we just inherited it, let's drop it, the history now? Why put so much effort towards healing? So these are the two questions: how to actually access healing, and why, and do we actually need healing? Maybe that's okay, we are not under threat anymore, let's drop it. So these are both the questions that what do you want to address first?
I guess somehow the why, it's a most important question, because why do I need actually think about something that it's not really disruptive to my everyday existence?
Because that's a very important part,
very,
because
very
unlike
important.
PTSD,
you go to see your GP, you go see your specialist because you're suffering from something that disrupts your everyday practice of life. But something about not having a proper boundary with your guest or with your with people that you have relationship with, your friends, can it be really that exhaustive, problematic that I need to really reflect on that? As a therapist, I would say yes, it is important, because people pleasing, it's all about keeping yourself safe and secure against the hurt of the other. So there is an expectation here. In every interaction, I try to please other people without them knowing that I'm trying to please them. So I expect them to please me in return. Spare me.
Like me.
Spare me, like me. But that expectation, it's not answered. It's not reflected upon. then that's the problem of relationship.
Yeah.
I'm going to be people pleaser. I said yes always to you, but you only call me whenever you are, you want me, or you ask a question, or you need a help from me. This is not a relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually, this is the very thing that I always presented.
Yeah, exactly.
That I'm available anyhow, anywhere, in any circumstances to people to be a helper.
Exactly.
So this is not real me.
Yeah, because you never offer real you to them.
Exactly. So
in
it was only
you are presenting what they would like.
Exactly. So that is the problem. So I'm not saying that this is not a problem. It is a problem.
Yeah.
So in this sense, as a therapist, I would say, I guess you need to reflect on that.
Yeah.
But there is another thing that I want to bring phenomenology here to answer that. Through generative phenomenology, Husserlian generative phenomenology, we are talking about certain phenomena that we don't experience first at hand. So it's not a personal experience. I am personally experienced sitting on this couch or chair. I am personally experiencing the flow of a nice breeze on my skin. But I don't experience the death of my grandfather the way personally.
Yeah.
Because he died.
Yeah, exactly.
He actually somehow been through that
experience.
He doesn't have the language for that. I don't have access to him for him to explain to me. But I am, even my death is like that. My birth is like that. I haven't experienced my birth in a descriptive sense.
Yeah, exactly.
The way that I can describe myself, my presence now in this room, I cannot describe my birth with the same accessibility. So Husserl would call it generatively we access it.
Yeah.
We access it through the words of the other. I'm accessing my birth through the words of my mom, my father, my uncle, my aunties. So I am going through certain childhood experiences through the stories and because my grandmother had just recite me some poetries that she made it herself when I was very sick. And I know that I was sick through her poetry to me when I was, I don't know, less than 6 months and I was hospitalized. So I have access to those moments of my life through the words of the other people. But I have access it, But I need to know that I am accessing myself through the eyes of a grandmother expecting to have nice moment with the first grandchild, that it didn't happen. So I'm accessing that part of my life through a grief of my grandmother. So I am accessing that part of my life through grief. But actually it was probably it was something else for me if I could access it personally. Yeah. So we need to understand that we access the history and all the things that happen through our generation through the narrative and through the lens of the other people, either experience it firsthand, or because if it was a really bad back, so it was very long in the history, through the narrative, through the lens of the narrators of the story, or the narratives that I know about that event. But when we understand that, become aware of this accessibility from that event, when I understand that, there was a certain poetry very close and around the Mongol invasion to north of Iran, to northeast of Iran, then I will have a better understanding of the people that I'm dealing with that are coming from that place in Iran first. And then the second thing is, okay, when I understand it, then I have a relation toward it. Understanding it, making a position towards something. So I take a stance toward that. when I take a stance, I have somehow an ethical responsibility toward it. The moment that you take a stance, you become either responsible to take care of it or do something.
Yeah.
You know, I somehow become aware of certain options that I have toward that. The moment I know something, I have an options to include it or not include it.
Okay.
It's exactly like that. Actually, inclusion is a good word. To include it into the narrative of my life. Or
do something about it.
Exactly. Exclude it from the narrative of my life. I put it away. So the moment that I know that there are certain exiled that I don't have any idea of the exiled of which self, the exiled part of which self they are, I become responsible toward either include it into the narrative of myself and my generation to come or exclude it. So this is the moment of morally engaging with the exile. So it's more than me healing the symptoms of PTSD.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all about the symptoms of whether I want to heal it so I disrupt the cycle of trauma or not.
And it is like the moment we bring ethics, we are bringing other people and our responsibility towards them. So it's, and as we discussed a few times before, that when we are talking about philosophy here, we're not talking academic philosophy. We are talking how, you know, we are answerable to other people and other people are answerable to us. What do we owe to each other? And the moment of awareness of this trauma brings us to a position where we are again at that kind of fork, you know, where you have to make a choice. As you said that, you know, do I carry on? Because you cannot stay neutral to it. As we have discussed Heidegger, as we have discussed so many philosophers before, that our, you know, positioning towards the other people cannot be of no care. We are so deeply rooted in this world that care is within our structure.
It's a human condition.
It's a human condition. And so if I am not including it into my kind of like a change pattern, some kind of a positioning towards it, and if I want to, you know, throw it into the box of exile again. It has been exiled for 1,000 years. Let's keep it there. We are actually siding with the oppressor here. In the language of, you know, generative phenomenology, in the language of ethics, because, you know, if you have read any political philosopher, you would know that, you know, if you don't speak up for the oppressed, then you are with the oppressor. You know, at least I think in our religious narrations, it said that, you know, stand up for truth, fight for truth. At least if you can't do anything, say in your heart that this was wrong. If you are too much in a position where your survival is at stake, at least in your heart, say that this was wrong. This person had no right to do that. If you had any power, take action, take steps. So, you know, not doing anything about it is not, you know, you can do it, but it's not ethically. You are
abandon your moral responsibility.
Exactly, and you are answerable to others, to your peers, to the next generation, because then you are instrumental in handing it over to the next generation and making them, instead of breaking the cycle, as you said, you are actually continuing that cycle.
So it's a very, very interesting prospect here, that it's just more than a psychological ease. It's more than a psychological settlement, ease, healing. Healing becomes your moral responsibility the moment that you understand. And imagine that if I have moral responsibility toward breaking the cycle of trauma, of my generational and intergenerational trauma, I will actually have a higher moral responsibility toward myself to heal myself, because I know that if I don't heal now, I will pass it on.
Yeah.
It will not finish with me.
Exactly.
Trauma stays within my generation and will follow to the future.
Yeah.
And this is the question. Am I going to do that?
Exactly.
Am I really responsible? Do I really feel responsible to give my exile to the next generation to carry?
Yeah.
So it's really important.
And you know, things that we discussed that, you know, okay, I now know that I'm people pleasing because of this Mongol invasion. So what I'll do is I won't please people anymore. And so I break that cycle. It doesn't work that way, because then you will give your mannerism and behavior would change, but you would give that exile to your next generation into another mannerism through something reactive. So through because the exile is not yet addressed, you haven't yet accessed the exile. So it is a long process. It can, and we have discussed it so many times that nothing happens in one session. Or even one like moment of thinking about it. It can be a process. Maybe first moment is just to be angry or just feeling shame that how am, like as you mentioned, that why I am so accommodating to white people and not so accommodating to people like I consider people inferior to me. I am ashamed of myself that I know, you know, I say all the time, I respect all human beings. I do not have any superiority towards any race, and this is how I feel about people. That when I see this person, I want to accommodate them, but not that person. And so it might be the feeling of shame. It might be the feeling of anger that why my ancestors did this. Why were they cowards? Why were they this or that? You know, so it can be anger, but anger is still a moral positioning. You are disgusted, you're angry. And now you know the exile. Now you are approaching it. You know, and at some point you might be in a position to go beyond that, but at least we have moved a step forward. You might just hand over that anger to the next generation.
And actually, anger plus recognition. I guess not even an affect, but actually recognition that, look, kid, you know, my children, there are certain stuff that you might feel nonsense in your behavior, but it is rooted in that. Just I'm giving you some stuff that I have some exile part through generation in the basement. If you had a chance, visit them. So that's simple, you know. It might be a starting point of a healing, because if I'm talking about intergenerational trauma,
it won't heal in
1,000 years back, it won't happen through me. It should happen through generation to come.
But we are just making the process start. And so things start changing little by little, and the next generations will decide how they would work it out. But at least we get the ball rolling. And that's why, you know, we did talk about the idea that it is an ethical responsibility. But the second question that we wouldn't get chance to address right now is how. But I think, as we said, that the starting point is actually knowing. Knowledge is the starting point. And then healing can take various shapes. So that's something we cannot address today. Maybe in one of our future episodes when we are addressing, you know, the how, because each address would look very different. And because in one of the episodes, I want to come to this idea of this wounded femininity and the mother-daughter bond, or the relationship between amongst women, and how it's structured in patriarchy. I
think it's all about the nature of the exile.
So
the nature of the exile.
Which exile you dealing
with. Shows exactly that how you're going to deal with it. So it's the correlation between the nature of the exiled and how you want to answer it, you know. Because it's a demand of the exile.
So you need to first identify the exile. So I think that's the first step, and that's where knowledge. So we did talk about that knowledge doesn't bring change, but it's the first step. You can't bypass that. So knowledge is necessary.
It is necessary
to know, but then you need to take steps. So knowledge doesn't lead to change, but it's the first step. So just to bring everything back here, so in the end, the first step towards healing intergenerational trauma is knowing. And allowing it. Recognizing it, and then allowing it to just come to your life. It can give rise to anger, it can give rise to hatred, disgust, shame, whatever it is.
But recognize those feelings
and
affects and try to understand.
Don't make it another exile.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Become responsible to these affects,
it could be uncomfortable, very painful, but making room for it in your life is the first step towards healing. I think that's a good point to wrap up this
episode. Thank you so much, Saima. It was a nice, and I was really excited about it. Because it was, for me, was a kind of a reflective. It was a reflective session on for myself as well. So I realized many things when actually I was telling you.
That's what I'm saying. A lot of things we discovered while talking. We did discuss a few things before, but these ideas didn't come to us. Some realizations just organically happened and took place and birth here.
Exactly. And actually, we thank you to make us possible for makes possible for us to enjoy these creative moments and discovery moments. So thank you again for joining us, and we're looking forward to have you in our next episode.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.